All right, hello y'all. We are going to talk about how to conduct research for your APUSH research paper. Specifically, we're going to talk about how to create like note cards using Noodletools, which we're looking at right now, to organize your research and share it with me so that I can keep an eye on what's going on and give you grades for your lovely research. So we're going to imagine that this is you've sat down for your like first research session. You're like, okay, yeah, it's good. We're going to look for primary sources first. That's what we're going to be kind of using as our example here. It's a good thing to start out with in your own research. Remember that when you're looking for primary sources, you're looking for either information you can quote, like a good quote to help support your thesis, or you might also be looking for evidence that you can paraphrase to support your thesis that you could sort of summarize up. For secondary sources, you're mostly going to be looking for paraphrases, but for primary sources, we might pull some direct quotes or we might pull some paraphrases. So you definitely, first thing, like I would just suggest when you sit down to start research, one of the first things you should do is go ahead and log into Noodletools and just sort of have this set up in a separate window. So when you log into Noodletools, you should be on this page. You won't have probably this many projects. This is a sample research paper that I set up. I'm going to imagine that I am doing some research on a paper about the Civil War infrastructure. So this would be like roads, bridges, like the role that railroads played in the war, right? The communications lines, those types of things. So if you'll see as I went into my project, I already have some things in here. I've sort of preset a couple of things and we're going to kind of add to them to show you sort of what's going on here. So the sort of page in Noodletools that you are going to want first is this one that it lands you on when you open your project. It's called the sources page. If you hover over the icons over here on the left, you'll see this. So the sources page looks like this little book stack at the top. This will be a list of all of your sources. I've already got 2 entered in here. We're going to look at how to enter another one. This sources page, this is going to collect your sources, and it's also Noodletools is like a citation maker, so it will sort of make the citation for you in the proper Chicago style format. I will point out that the process of making a source and inputting into Noodletools, it can feel kind of like annoying at first, or like it takes a little while. You do not want to skip this while you're doing research. Don't be like, oh, I'll just go gather quotes and then I'll come back and make my sources later. That will make your life so much worse. I know this from experience. I am a very big procrastinator, and I've absolutely tried to do it that way, and it sucks. You want to make the source citation first. So just a general heads up there. So a couple things that you want to make sure to make sure that your Noodletools is set up correctly. You do want to make sure that this particular paper is in like Chicago style format. And again, the way that you can check that is you can go back to the project itself, back to like the main project page, and you can click on like the little thingy over here and it'll say like change style, change level. If I click on like change style, it'll give me the option to change any of my settings for this paper. We want it to be advanced and Chicago, and I think that most of you guys did that when you set it up. Yay, okay, that's fine. So that is good. Now it's mad at me because I'm trying to change. Okay. So again, we're in good shape, Chicago, advanced, right, etc. All right, so we are going to imagine that you are doing some research. We're actually going to start off in one of the places that I think is a good place to start off your primary source research, and that is some of the links that I've provided on the research paper page on Canvas. So if you go to our class Canvas, you will see over on the left a standalone page that's just called research paper. I've pointed this out a couple times in class. This is where I'm housing all of like the sort of how-to videos. This video that you're watching right now will be embedded here when I'm done with it. So we kind of scroll down, exemplar papers, etc. There's a section down here that says starting points for primary sources. So these are some links to places that primary sources are housed that I think that you as like a beginning researcher might find it relatively easy to navigate or find things. Sort of like newspapers, general collections, right, some specific collections of topics, etc. We're going to start with the Library of Congress because I know there's a source there that I want to use. The Library of Congress has some digital collections. You can kind of scroll through if these are topics of interest to you. You can see some interest. Ooh, early baseball. That would be an interesting topic. But I know that what I'm looking for, which is like Civil War infrastructure stuff, I know that I want to do a broader search. So I'm going to swap this from just their digital collections to everything. And this is where you would sort of be doing a search time period. Sometimes you can sort, the time period over on the left-hand side. There'll be a menu or whatnot. Specifically, because I'm looking at the Civil War and I want to know kind of like what experiences were like with infrastructure, etc. I'm going to search for Civil War era diaries. This is like a thing that people during the Civil War kept, and a lot of them talked about like logistical issues, etc. You can see as I scroll here, it turns up a whole bunch of stuff. Civil War maps. Ooh, Downing's Civil War diary. That's probably a pretty good one, right? Ooh, lady spies in the Civil War. It's just a whole bunch of stuff. You could spend a bunch of time browsing through here. You're trying to find a source that seems like, useful to you. I did find one when I was looking earlier, so I'm actually just going to search for that more directly. It's a gentleman's last name is Hancock. His diary. Oh, Hancock's diary. Fine. So I'm going to the source itself. So this is my primary source. I have already previewed this a little bit. I know that it's like a good source, but this is the point at which you would want to preview your source. It's kind of annoying to put the source into Noodletools. You don't want to do that unless you know for sure that like you're going to use the source. On a lot of archives of historical papers, especially older ones, like if your topic is from older time period, what they will often have is documents that are scanned in as images. They're scanned in as like JPEGs usually, or some other image file. And that's exactly what this is. This is a guy named Hancock. He wrote a diary during the Civil War. It was published, it looks like, because it's got like publication information down here. And then the Library of Congress has scanned it in. So if I click on this, it might take a second because it's a pretty big file, but it's just going to load literally like a picture of every single page. This one is typed, not handwritten, which is nice. So at least like this is readable, but it's not the best for me anyway for research, because I don't really want to look at, all whatever, 694 different images. I would like a PDF or like a plain text file so that I can use Control F and just search for like some keywords. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and download this PDF. This might take a sec sometimes. So what I'm looking to do here is I'm looking to get a file that will let me do a Control F search. So if you look at your keyboard, probably in the bottom left corner of your keyboard, there should be a button that's titled CTRL. That's the control key. And if you hold the control key, forgive me for explaining hotkeys to you, but not everybody's up with this. If you hold the control key and then you hold the F letter key at the same time, you will get this little pop-up that I just got up here, and it will let you search any page and it'll sort of jump right to any word. This is a phenomenal tool for research, right? It's like, I don't know how people researched without this before this was a thing, because it will let you look at, this is a 694 page PDF, but what I can do, you can see I already typed in bridge up here, right? I can type in whatever word I'm looking for, bridge, road, right, balloon, right, or whatever infrastructure I'm looking for, and I hit enter, and it'll tell me how many times that occurs, and then if I just keep hitting the little down arrow, it will take me to all of those times, whee, right, etc. And so what I would want to be doing here is sort of reading or scanning over these, essentially to see if any of them are useful. So let's say that I hit this entry here, where they're talking about essentially like crossing a bridge is a key force of infrastructure, and I'm like, oh, like this quote right here, like this looks really useful. I think that I could maybe use this in my paper. So at this point, I've found a source, right, a primary source, and I know there's something in here that's useful, a quote that I can use, right, in this particular case, or maybe a piece of information. Now is when I would go over to Noodletools and I would be like, okay, I'm going to enter this source in. So I'm just going to kind of leave that tab open with the PDF while we enter the source itself here. So I already have a couple sources in here. You probably won't have anything when you start. You're just going to come up here to green, click on new source. First thing that you're going to do is say, where is it? Not what is it yet. We're going to get to that in a second. Where is it? Where did you find it? For most of you, especially at the beginning of your research, the answer to that is almost always going to be website, right? Even if it's not a website that you're citing, but it's like on a website, this is the one you're going to use. Some of you might wind up with books, like when we go to UNC libraries, if you like look at an actual physical book, that's going to be print or in hand, like it's a literal physical book. Some of you might wind up with ebooks, so you check out, or from the Chapel Hill Public Library or from Google Books or whatnot. You can use ebook there. If you wind up using the databases at UNC, you might use database, but for the most part, you're probably going to select website here. And then when you select website, you get a whole plethora of options for what it is. So first thing to say before we even get into like some of these options, you just want to select what you think is the best match, right? There's a lot of sources that aren't going to precisely fit exactly one of these categories. You're just going to do basically like your best with it, pick the one that's the closest, and the citation machine will kind of handle the rest. A few things that I want to point out. You probably shouldn't really be using any of these over here in the light yellow unless you're doing a really, really recent topic, right? These are almost all E stuff. The diary that I was looking at, you might look at this and be like, oh, a journal. journal, like that was a diary, like a journal, same thing. This is journal like a professional journal, like the Journal of, American Association of Pediatrics or Journal of Historians or whatnot. You are probably not going to use this, again, unless you go on databases. So that's probably not likely what you're going to be looking for. You might potentially have a book online, and in fact, the source that I was just looking at, the Hancock's Diary, that was published. So I could use book. I'm not going to here, I'm going to use a different one, but that I could use book very easily. Some of you guys might wind up using, like you might have like a law that you're looking at, or you're citing the Constitution, right? Another one that I wanted to point out here, like chart tables or infographics. These would be secondary sources mostly. Born Digital just means that it's created on the website, like by the website, as opposed to created inside of a book. So if you're sort of citing like a chart in a book, you would do it as a book as opposed to this Born Digital one here. Let me see if there's any others that we want to chat about. Okay, so those are the main ones that I wanted to point out. For most of you, for your primary sources, the best one to use, the one that I think is the most flexible and the most useful, is going to be this second pink one down right here, this historical work in an archive. This is a good one for just kind of like, this is a generic primary source that I found online somewhere. So that's the one that I'm going to pick for my primary source. Just because I want you to see what this looks like, even though, like I said, I could technically cite that as a book if I wanted. It's going to give you some options here. Manuscript means that it's handwritten. So if it's handwritten, then you would select manuscript. Correspondence, right, if it's an unpublished letter, map or chart, this isn't, but you might wind up with some of those, photo or illustration, etc. I'm going to go with manuscript. Yeah, this works relatively well for me. And then it's going to give me all sorts of options here. This should hopefully be familiar from your citation generator. Your goal here is to fill in as much as you can, with the understanding that probably some of these blanks will be left blank, and that is okay. If the only thing you have is like the URL and maybe like the title of a web page, that's probably not a very good source. So you want a few other things, but it's also okay if you don't have every single thing filled in. So if I come back, this is my PDF, but I'm going to come back and look at the Library of Congress is really great because if you look underneath the source, it gives me like pretty much all of what I need here, right? Like it's got kind of every title, right, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to start to use this to fill in. Usually what you would want to do is have, I love split screen, right, for research. So you'd want to have this up in one screen and then Noodletools up in the other screen, and you're just copying back and forth. So first I'm going to copy the URL address. Most recent date of access, this is because web pages can change, right? So you can just click on today. That's very nice. I appreciate that. Author for Hancock's Diary is going to be Mr. Hancock. So you can see his name right down here. So we got Hancock for the last name and Richard Ramsey. Richard Ramsey. I think it was S-E-Y. Oops, what did I just do? Man. Help. I might go back and edit this out. Oh, I see what I did. I accidentally hit the little trash can over here. Probably you saw that better than I do. Don't do that. I got it back anyway. Okay, so he's Richard Ramsey, R-A-M-S-D-Y. This is real life here, people, real research. We also want to know the year, definitely. So this one looks like it was published in 1887. I'm looking for, I don't see any months, like it doesn't say like whatever, May 10th or whatnot. So when it comes down to the date author down here, I'm just going to put the year in. It would be great, like it's better if you have the month and day, but if you don't, just the year is okay. Title of the document here, I'm just going to use the same title that the Library of Congress used. You could use something descriptive if you wanted to. I'm going to say this is a longer book length work. Okay, this looks pretty good. So again, you're just inputting like as much as you want. As you can see, you can add contributor here. So if you have like something and it's got like, it won't give you this for manuscript, but other ones, if you have like an editor that you wanted to add or somebody else who might need to be cited, you could input them in there. At this point, I'm going to hit save. And then, hey, there's my lovely, beautiful citation right there, all set and all ready to go. One thing that you might have noticed when we were doing this citation, I'm going to open up a new one here real quick, is you might have seen, manuscript, up at the top here, this, quick cite, copy and paste a citation, and or when we were over here on the Library of Congress, if you scroll down far enough on the Library of Congress, they have this. They have like pre-slugged citations, for Chicago style. This is very tempting here. So if you were just like, I'm just going to copy this citation from the Library of Congress, then I'm going to come over here and just paste it into this box, right, and hit save, and then it also appears here. So you can see I have two of these same ones. This one says it's a copy of a pre-formatted citation. Let me show you why that's maybe not your best bet for this paper in particular. So with Chicago, there's two types of citations that you need. You need a citation that's going to go in the footnote that's like attached to a little number. We'll have another video talking about how to do that. And you also need a citation in your bibliography at the end of the paper. This version that you see on the slide here, these are bibliography style citations. The footnote citations are a little bit different. Noodletools will make the different types for you, but only if you input the values. So here's the first one. This is not the pre-formatted one. This is the one where I entered all of the values. If I move my face here, if I click on the little snowman over here, it gives me all of these different options. I don't want to delete it. If I click on footnote format, going to pop up a lovely little box, and I can just copy this and I can paste it right into my footnote, and life is good. And that is so much quicker while I'm writing my paper. However, if I go up to the pre-formatted citation, this is the one where I didn't input things into Noodletools boxes. I just like copied and pasted whatever. That was quicker at the time, but now if I go over here and I want this to make a footnote, it's not going to, because I didn't put things in its little like slots. It doesn't know how to rearrange them for other formats. So it would make me cite it manually, and that is annoying. So this is why I generally don't suggest using like a copying your citation directly into here. I think it's much better, more time saving for you to input it, even though again, a little bit annoying. Okay, so now finally, oh wait, one last thing with this. You do also want to add, I would say, one piece of annotation. Your bibliography eventually is going to be divided between primary sources and secondary sources, and it will let you tag what the sources are. So I'm going to come over here and hit this little plus, and then I'm going to tag this as a primary source. I forgot to tag this one down here at the bottom, so this is a secondary source actually, so we'll go ahead and tag that, and you can see they get like little P's and S's here. That's going to make sorting your bibliography much easier. You might have noticed while I was tagging that there's a third option, tertiary source, so primary, secondary, tertiary. You should not really be using tertiary sources, or not citing them, I guess, for this paper. Primary sources are sources that are produced at the time. Secondary sources are sources that are produced by historians, like books and articles and things like that. Tertiary sources are sources that are produced from secondary sources that sort of like aggregate or overall like a bunch of different secondary sources. This is like Wikipedia, textbooks, encyclopedias. Those are tertiary sources. You can use those to start your research, like help you learn about something, but you generally shouldn't be citing or quoting those. So all your sources should be either primary or secondary for this. Okay, so we've done the sources part, right? We've got our source, life is good, etc. We have a citation. Depending on how good this source is, it's like 600 pages. Maybe there's a lot of stuff about bridges that I can find in there. I'm going to pull note cards from this. So we've been in the sources over here on the left. Now we're going to go over to note cards. This is the one that looks like this little kind of like 4 icons here, right? Note cards. You can see again that I've already got like a couple in here that I pre-selected, and we're going to kind of add one in. So what the purpose of a note card is, any note card, any individual note card is intended to capture like one detail, one quote, maybe one paraphrase or one idea from a source. If you have a really good source, you might wind up with like 10 or 15 note cards from it, right? If there's really a lot that could actually help your paper. Other sources, you might only get 1 or 2 note cards from, right? So any individual source in your bibliography could yield, again, anywhere from 1 to, maybe 10 plus note cards, just depending on how rich and how like useful it is for your paper itself. So we're going to come back over to Hancock's diary. This is the quote that I decided that I wanted, right, from my page here. I'm just going to copy this again. So the other nice thing about PDFs, I can copy paste, which I love to do. We're going to come back to Noodletools, and we're going to make a note card. So click on new note card up here. I'm going to skip the main idea for just a sec. First thing that I'm going to do is tie this to the source. Here's another great Noodletools thing. Once you've put a source into your bibliography, now it shows up here in the drop down. Oops, I forgot to delete my pre-formatted one. I think this is the right one. So I'm going to select the source so that I know what it is. This is a book, and it's got page numbers. So this is page what? 46. So I'm going to put the page number in up here. If it's an ebook, you can put like the location, or if it's just a page that like it's just a web page or whatnot, then you would just leave that blank. But that's where you put the page numbers in up there at the upper right. And then you have basically, let me move myself out of the way here. You have basically 3 options on the note cards for where you're going to put stuff. On the left, you have direct quotation. This is probably what you're going to be using the most often. This is like, I've just pulled a quote from a book that I want to remember. It's in the words of the original author, not my own words. So I'm just going to copy copy paste that in there. That's my direct quotation. At this point, I could be done with the note card. You do not need to fill out all 3 of these for every note card. In fact, most note cards, you're probably only filling out 1. You're filling out the direct quotation if it's a direct quote. You also potentially could have a source where you don't really want to pull a quote from it, but you want to like paraphrase it or summarize it a little bit to talk about in your research. Especially this is going to be true for visual sources like a painting or a political cartoon or a map. I'm going to show you guys one of those in just a sec when we go back and look at the sources. So that might go over here. Third type, and this is like not everybody winds up using this at all, so you don't have to have note cards with this on it if you don't want. But if you have an idea that you want to remember to put in your paper and it's like your idea, you're like, oh, I really want to make sure I remember to talk about, I don't know, why balloons are important. You can put that down here under your original thinking and use that to sort of like help organize your paper. Again, this doesn't get used very much by most people. So this is a direct quote, so I'm just going to direct quote it over there. I've attached the source. I put the page number. The last thing that I'm going to do is I want like a little title here. Once this goes on the note card, the title is going to help me remember like what is on this quote. So I'm going to say, this is like, when I'm doing Civil War, I always like to say Union or Confederate. So I'm going to say, whoops. I'm going to say Confed, and this is about bridge, like significance, or something like that. I can't spell significance. So a little title that like I can just see at a glance and be like, oh, I remember which quote that is. I'm going to hit save and close. If I change my mind about anything, I could go back in and open it up and change it. So you see now I've got this lovely little note card that I can move around as I like. You can do a lot of things with these note cards. They have a lot of options down here. You could apply tags if you're like a taggy person. I don't really get that, but you can if you want to. You can apply a cue. I've seen students use this like to great help. This is like, lets you be like, oh, this is a note card that has my original thinking. So you can just see it at a glance, or this is a note card that like I think I need to look at a little bit more, right, or whatever. So you can add that there. You can also color code them if you're a color coder. I love to color code things. You don't have to color code anything if you don't want to, but those are options that you can use with your note cards. One thing that I do strongly recommend you doing, and that I'm going to show you how to do right now, is it's really, really good once you've got a few note cards to start to kind of stack them into groups that might become paragraphs. So if I'm sort of looking at, I've only got 4 note cards here, right? That's not a ton, but I'm already seeing that I've got like a couple about bridges here. Maybe I might wind up writing a paragraph of my paper about how bridges were really important, like piece of infrastructure in the Civil War. So I want to sort of like start to link these together. One thing that I can do is with either of these, it doesn't matter which one. This on the far left, there's this little icon that looks like a little pile of papers. I'm going to click on this. I'm going to create a new pile. I'm going to call this bridges, whatever it is. Create. And now, instead of just a single note card, you can see how it's like it's got like a drop down basically. And now I can drag any other note cards that I create about bridges, for the whole rest of my research. I can drag them right back over here, and now they're all in here together, right? They're all in sort of like one big lump. If I decide that I don't like that, or I can delete the pile, I can rename the pile, right, etc. So I can move that around. So maybe I'm gonna have a paragraph about bridges. So this is the note card, like the sort of tabletop view of your note cards. You can sort of start to get a sense of how it might help you organize your paper. There's another view that I want to show you real quick too, if you don't like this. This visual doesn't work for you. So this is the tabletop view here. There's also what's called detail view. Detail view starts out, it doesn't look like it's showing you anything, but if you click on the note cards, they'll start to show up over here. Clicky, clicky. I'll show you guys that note card in just a sec. You can see those 2 note cards here, and you can see that it's kept my organization. So those 2 note cards that I grouped under bridges are also grouped under bridges here, and this way I can just kind of scroll through my note cards instead of looking at them on the tabletop. I did also want to real quick show you, go away. I want to select those. Show you one note card of what it might look like if you were using like a visual source. So here is a map of like railroads, basically Union railroads in Virginia during the Petersburg campaign. So I actually just like pasted the image here over in direct quotation because I like to have the images handy when I'm doing my research. But the main thing, like if you find an image and you're like, oh, I want to use this in my paper, usually what that note card is going to look like is just sort of like you taking notes in the paraphrase section of like what does the image show that you want to make sure to talk about in the paper. Like, oh, it shows like the women as subjugated, or oh, it shows the locations of railroad depots and there's like a lot of them on the East Coast or something like that. So that's what a note card might look like if you have an image. Okay. Just to go back to my projects, I mentioned in the last video that I use Noodletools for my own research for my master's. So here's what this might eventually wind up looking like for you. Like at the end of a long project, you've got a whole bunch of sources, and then when you go into your tabletop view, what you have, this decides it was basically like an outline of your paper already done, right? These wound up basically being the paragraphs of my paper on like Latinos in North Carolina and the Jim Crow eras. It's kind of like a chronological paper with like some scholarship background. So doing the organization this way, again, it lets you sort of like move things around and essentially create the outline as you are going. So to like recap the process, right? Sort of like what is the basic process of note card research. The first thing you do is find a source, right? Find a primary source or a secondary source. Make sure it's got useful information. Here's a source, it's got something I need. The second thing that you do is you create a source citation in sources, right? Just like we did here. Oops, this is the wrong project. You create a source in the source citations. The third thing you do, once you have created the citation here, is you go and you create as many note cards as you wanted, right? The Hancock's diary was like 694 pages. Probably I'm going to get more than one note card out of this, and I would just keep happily creating note cards until I didn't have anything else useful from the source itself. And then I would go find a new source and repeat. Find a source, add the source to your bibliography, essentially to your sources, create as many note cards as you can from the source, find a new source, move on. Okay, so there's one last thing that I want to talk about that is a very common kind of like problem that people run into as they are researching, and this is what to do if you find a good source, like a good quote, let's say, a primary source quote that seems like it would be useful to you, but it is not like the primary source itself, it's a quote in something else. Like you're reading a New York Times article about the Civil War and there's like a quote from a soldier's diary and you're like, ooh, I'd like to cite that, that's good. Here is one that I found. This is an article, this happens to actually be on the National Archives, but you can see it's an article. It was written in the summer of 2011, so this is not a primary source, right? It's a historian's secondary source. And in this historian's like article that they're writing, there's a lot of good primary source quotes. Let's say that I, as I was reading this, saw this quote about how the general has the, what the sort of like abilities of the general are to take possession of infrastructure. And I'm like, ooh, this is a really good quote. This seems like it would be a good primary source. I need at least 7 primary sources for my paper, so I want to cite this as a primary source, not like a secondary source. Like, how do I do that? What I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to find this primary source somewhere else where I can cite the whole primary source and not just the little quote bit of it here. I'm going to copy a chunk of this quote that I want to use. I want to copy enough that not like the whole thing sometimes if it's really long, but copy enough that's sort of unique, right? That I'm probably going to pop up this source and, not just like the word the or something. I'm going to come over to Google. Maybe I'll put it in quotes. I'm going to leave it loose, at least at first. I'm just copy pasting. Usually the first thing that comes up is whatever you were just looking at. So that's the page article that I was just looking at. But sometimes if you keep looking, if you keep sort of scrolling through Google Archives, you can find a page or place that has the whole primary source, not just the little quote from the secondary, but the whole primary source. In this case, this is the American Presidency Project. I happen to know this is a site that archives like executive orders of various presidents, and so it's being really slow right now because it hates me. But if we click on this, eventually, very slow. Come on, Google. If we click on this eventually, hopefully what it will do is open up a page that has the full primary source, and then I can cite it as a primary source. Maybe there's more in there that I can use, right? If it had one good quote, maybe it had more good quotes, and now that adds to my list of like primary sources for the paper. Yay, there it goes. Okay, so this is an executive order by Abraham Lincoln. Here's the full thing. This gives me all of the information that I need to cite it as a primary source. Who issued it, when it was issued, again, the full quote. Maybe I can use some of the rest of that. So again, if you find a primary source embedded in a secondary source, the first thing to do is go search and see if you can find the whole primary source somewhere where you can cite it. If you can't, sometimes you will not be able to. It's like a work in an archive and it's not online or it's not digitized. There is still a way to handle it. In the packet that I gave you guys, if you look at the pages labeled Step 2, one of them talks about tricky citation stuff, and it talks about how to cite a primary source that you found in a secondary source. There is a way to do that. It's just a little bit more annoying than finding the original primary source. Okay, so that is a basic overview of the research process in Noodletools. You definitely want to make sure, if you have not already, that your project is shared with me, right? When you go and look at your project, you should see this lovely little shared symbol that looks like a file box. You should be able to hover over it and see me, that is shared with me. That's important for grading purposes. If you have questions about anything, you can drop me an email, or obviously you can ask me in class. Good luck on your research, and thanks for your time, guys. Bye.